Welcome to Sex, Love and Science with Laurie Muratori, clinical psychosexual therapist and relationship expert. This podcast explores sexuality, relationships, and the many facets in between, aiming to normalize sexual conversations, issues that we all face. Let's take the taboo out of sexuality and open up the conversations for a better sexual existence. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. All right, welcome back today, everyone. I have quite an exciting episode because I'm going to be talking all about clitoris. And who I have here is probably the best person I could be talking to about this because I have Anita Brown-Major here, and she's part of the International Cliterati, which I think is probably the coolest thing you could actually do you have a business card that says that?
I want to make a badge. I think it is my coolest title.
You need a badge.
Definitely need a badge. Yeah.
Or if you have a desk, it should have your name.
Oh, yes.
Like one of those old school plaques.
Yes.
I
think, yeah.
You need that.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. I'm going to go back and do that now.
Yeah. I mean, so Anita actually has a private practice here called Thrive Rehab, and that's in Brunswick. Yes.
Yeah. Brunswick East.
Brunswick East. Tell everyone what you focus on because it's not just an OT practice.
No, I am very privileged to employ a number of OTs, and we have sort of two focuses. So one is my passion, so sexuality and disability, which is sort of what I've been working on for the last 25 years. So we work with all forms of people and folk and basically looking at pleasure and education because we know that often people with disabilities are either not seen as a sexual being or it's not talked about or it's just completely missed. So we do a lot of work individually with clients, but also my passion is to train other health professionals on how to do this within general practice because it doesn't have to be a specialist area to ask about sex and intimacy and pleasure. So we're sort of trying to form the ability to be the backstop so we can help people out when they can open the can of worms and not freak out that they can't make good and helpful suggestions and conversations. So really practical sort of concepts. And the other side of the business is led by Sarah Plexus, and that's a lot more around psychosocial neurodiversity. So working a lot with NDIS, but with folks who are, just looking at how do we do general OT in the space of being neuroaffirming. I'm pretty proud of that side of the business fantastic. Because it's not an area that a lot of OTs or health professionals focus on, but basically I employ lots of folk that are not like me or are diverse in multiple different ways. So smart. I think that is really exciting for me.
Wow. So if anybody listening, go check out Anita and her team at Thrive Rehab because I think those services are so needed. And I would say there's a huge portion of my client base and other therapists as well who could refer on. So fantastic. And how special are we to have you in Melbourne? So that's pretty cool.
Melbourne is batting above its average with a lot of this sort of stuff. It's pretty fun to be surrounded by such amazing therapists and doctors and
absolutely
researchers.
We are lucky. But I want to talk about clitoris today. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of the disability space, neurodivergence, and sexuality, which I want to actually do another episode. So
let's do that.
We'll do that. But so I saw Anita talk at the SIPS conference, which is the sexual symposium, and that was last year. And she did a fabulous presentation about just the clitoris model that she's actually invented, and talked a lot about that and gave us a lot of background. And I think the number one thing that's come out and that's actually in politics at the moment and being widely spread is there's not enough research about vulvas.
Yeah, it's look, I've had a really fun, probably 5 or 6 year journey of trying to get all the medical research and then translate it into accessible formats for people. Originally was for people with disabilities. And then as we've gone along the journey, we've gone, actually, this doesn't exist as accessible information really for anyone. It's just really fun. And I think the aha moments is that we still are finding out more and more information because the research hasn't existed really. Most medical research has often been focused on penis bodies as such, even medication trials. So there's a lot more information around that. But we did a PubMed search, I think in April of 2024, and there was like 52,000 articles on the penis, and there was like 2,000 articles on the clitoris, which was a lot more than it was 6 years ago. So it's getting there, but we basically, a lot of the understandings of vulva and clitorises have come from, well, how is it related to the penis? So everything sort of gets referred back to what does a penis do? Where is that in the vulva body? So it's really interesting about trying to debunk myths, and everything is named after a bloke. So it's
see, that's the part I don't understand, and I'm also really confused why we're not looking at two bodies as completely unique bodies, that it's being compared to a penis body. That I'm just really confused on why.
And look, I think it's who's had the funding and who's had the power really in the past for making these educational research as such. And
so it goes back to the patriarchy, is what you're saying?
So it goes back to the patriarchy. And all bodies are diverse. Like we're all made from we all start with the same bits, and they get is flooded with hormones and changes and genetic concepts, and then we are all different. And nature loves that diversity. It's just that sometimes people don't like diversity as such. So we really try and work out, well, what is the evidence? And I think I've been really shocked with how often we go, we just don't know that. Thus me joining or helping form the International Cliterati, we've basically sought out other model makers from around the world and medical professionals. And I, as a therapist, I sit there and go, this might seem like a really silly question, but what happens here? And it's really interesting getting feedback from people around the world to say, oh, we just don't know. Or
really?
Yeah. So even, and just even language on how we label the clitoris. So the clitoris was only really mapped in 1998.
Wait, what? Sorry, hang on.
Yeah.
Wait, pause. 1998. Which was not that long ago.
Yeah. So it's really not that long ago. And I went and saw a comedian and gave her a clitoris model, and Deborah Francis White. And she was very quick in saying, I found my clitoris before 1998. like seriously. But basically the history of the clitoris is it's been found in cadaver research probably since the early, like 1500s. But it's been named all these different ways. But it's the patriarchy has been strong. It's often been erased. And certainly in the like when I was studying OT, the clitoris was in the textbooks, but certainly not in the same form as what it is now. And so we were having all of these surgeries done around vulvas and with it, the nerves weren't mapped. The structure wasn't mapped. So the amazing, again, Melbourne-based Professor Helen O'Connell is an amazing urologist. So she was the first female urologist in Australia. And she basically went, well, why are we cutting and we don't know what the structures are around or the innovations? Like, this is not great. And when you think about if she's the first urologist, she's the first person thinking about, well, actually, I don't want my nerves to my clitoris cut. What does that mean if we don't know where they are? Scary stuff. So really, it wasn't until 2005 that we got MRI imaging. And in 1998 was also the year Viagra was released. So the research was a little bit like
more skewed in that direction.
It's more skewed into, wow, we've got Viagra, rather than actually we still don't know the full structure of the clitoris.
Just my head slowly just exploding over here. So that just gives you a context of how little known is by of vulva owner bodies.
Yeah.
And what's actually bit going into the research, which is a bit of all.
Yes. Yep.
And we still have a lot to learn, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot, even interestingly, was the naming of the different parts of the clitoris. So the clitoral bulbs, which is what Dr. Helen O'Connell will talk about, and actually when I've gone back to the International Cliterati, they used to be known as the vestibular bulbs, and there's a lot of, because they're in the vestibula of the vulva, and there's still a lot of conjecture of terminology and naming going back and forth. No, they still should be the vestibular bulbs, whereas actually the International Cliterati, I think, are pretty set on clitoral bulbs, and that is the bulb wraps around the urethra and the vagina, and that's the bit that gets engorged with blood. So when we talk about I don't actually talk about clitoral erections because often people think the glands raise up. And because again, we start thinking about, well, how does it work in the penis? So does that work in the vulva? Whereas the glands actually go through adipose tissue and they're stuck down with ligaments. So although the gland does swell, it doesn't actually move. Whereas what actually moves is the bulbs that wrap around the urethra, which has also got erectile tissue, which is interesting. And the vagina, they swell and engorge with blood. And that's what helps lubrication because you're actually having increased osmolarity around that structure. But everyone's clitoris sits in a different position.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's good to know for everyone out there.
Yeah, and it's the same, but they're all in the same bit. So it's like you're thinking about vulvas and clitoris is like a face. Like we're all different and we're all unique. And we all have, differences, but they are still common features. But yeah, they are distinct as fingerprints. So my other really main headspace is again, in Australia, we're really lucky that we've got Mona in Tasmania, which shows vulva diversity, which is great. But actually that information is still not getting through that don't have Barbie vulvas.
Exactly.
And that actually there's some really amazing researchers which have put it back into Grey's Anatomy. So the doctors have never had diversity in their textbooks about vulvas being different, and that inner labias are different. And it's more common to have protruding labias. It's more common for them to be asymmetrical. They have lots of erectile tissue within inner labias. So inner labias is the bit which sort of covers around the vagina and the opening of the urethra. And they have a really big role in funneling urine. They have a big role in cushioning. So in terms of when you're sitting down. And so it really scares me the amount of labioplasties, which is basically taking the skin and chopping it off to make it look like a porn vulva.
It's cute. It's the I'm putting my fingers in quotes here, the neat and tidy look, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so the consequences of potentially that are the nerves are being cut off.
Yeah, so there's lots of nerves that are coming through there. I think the consequences is because we haven't had in the medical dictionaries diversity. If you came into a GP and they went, oh, is this normal? If that doctor hasn't seen diversity within their textbooks to start with, then they're going to go, oh, I'm not quite sure. I'll send you off. So if someone says, I'm not quite sure if that's normal or not, you're going to start freaking out.
Then you're just going to label yourself as I'm not normal.
Yeah. And this information is really needing to be coming at an early age because people will start, when I talk to people, they start thinking that I'm not normal or I'm not different. I'm different. Because they're learning their education from porn. And we still know that there are media laws around in even Australia that we have to not show vulvas or they have to be neat and tidy. So there's been a historical concepts of if you were to show a vulva, in porn or in any sort of media, we're always seen as too rude. And that perpetuates even today. Even the words around vulva and clitoris and clit get blocked so often on any social media that I do.
How hard is it to run a sex positive business?
Oh, it really is hard. We had a bank transfer. One of the someone was doing a direct bank transfer for our clit and collect pack, and they put into the bank transfer clit pack, and the bank actually said, "Oh no, that's too rude. You can't put that as a description." And, it wasn't going anywhere somewhere else other than the bank. So then we tried penis pack, that went through, and dick pack went through, but clit pack and clitoris never gets through. So we have this really concept of we need to protect the clitoris, and it's too rude to talk about, and it's too rude. So it's no wonder we don't have.
And no wonder why everybody's just not, it's so taboo, and everybody's running around thinking that they're not normal. And I want to know if I'm normal. Sorry, I'm going to sound ignorant, but is this just in Australia, or is this, do you think?
I think it's definitely around the world. Certainly the International Cliterati, I've had other, the Sex Ed Positive, which is a model maker in Canada, Magda, will have had their LinkedIn posts shut down, and like it's all, we joined together with a concept of how people are trying to protect. It's quite scary. But I've certainly done a podcast recently with a Nigerian sexologist. It was amazing. But this is a worldwide phenomenon. But it is education. So my passion is, how do we translate the medical evidence of what we know, we still don't know everything, into accessible formats so that everyone can actually understand what's going on, because the knowledge is power.
That's how that's empowering.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm just going to go back to the labiaplasty for a second, because I know that there's quite there's a lot of advocates in that area to kind of start dispelling that that's not needed. From a medical perspective, I think we were chatting before that if the nerves aren't there anymore, right? If you have a labiaplasty, that we don't know how that is through the aging process. Yeah.
So one of the big things that we're talking about, and maybe that's because I'm perimenopausal myself, it's amazing what you start deep diving into when you start thinking about these concepts. But certainly we know that post-menopause, that bodies obviously change, and that there is often more dry vulvas, or what they, was shrinking as such. So if you've already cut off parts of your inner labia, we don't know how that impacts post-menopause. Like there just hasn't been the research around that to really understand, well, does that impact comfort levels or sexual desire, or what does that mean post menopause? We do a lot of work, particularly with doctors, about desire and libido, and that amazing, I think, the amazing concept that vulva owners can have multiple orgasms. So that I do a lot of work with people about if the vulva owner can have an orgasm first. So we know that is more common with oral sex or toys or other options, lots of foreplay, and then engage in partnered sex afterwards is often a really great way of, because we want these experiences to be following pleasure. If you find pleasure, you will go back for pleasure. If you find pain, you're not going to go back, and you shouldn't. Like, sex should not be painful.
100%. 100%. And that's what I was thinking from a pleasure perspective of, nerves, because that's going to tell our brain, hey, this feels good, and everything's going to start firing.
And it's so interesting, actually. So this is a side note, because I spent a lot of time on the clitoris model of going, do you put pubic hair in or not? But if you think about, pubic hair is actually also quite sensual. So if you pull or tug at your pubic hair, like you pull or tug, like if people have their head massage, it's really quite lovely. But actually not having pubic hair means you take away one of those senses of some of that, being able to the friction and the pulling and that sensuality around that. So it's really interesting. I think we're coming a little bit back towards, having pubic hair around.
That's a good point.
So
that's a really good point.
There's so many different options around what does that look like, or I could talk about this for a very long time. You'll have to.
No, I think that's fantastic, because, again, back to porn and what's, normal and where people are getting their education is that vulva owners should be waxed and clean and tidy, right? And everything's, but going back to pleasure, because I can't ever take that pleasure hat off, right?
Go the pleasure.
Is that with hair, it's one of the senses, and you're just taking away from potentially something that could feel good.
Yeah.
Which is like, why would we want to do that?
I know. And it's also about that concept of who are we pleasing?
Well, I've got to look good for if I'm a hetero couple and we're looking at heterosexual, then I have to do that for the penis owner. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so much. And look, I definitely would love to do another podcast on senses and sexuality around the senses. So touch, pain, interoception, all of that sort of stuff is what we deep dive a lot as OTs.
Yeah.
And there's some really interesting research around that. But I think with vulvas, we need to look at our vulva. Like I think actually we started in the 1970s, before any of this research happened, there was this amazing group of women that sat around and actually masturbated and looked at each other's clitorises and started drawing and mapping what was going on externally, which is fabulous. Take the patriarchy down, go the 1970s. And as actually a lot more sex positive. So I often talk about with the clients that we're seeing now in their 80s and 90s, they're often more sex positive than some of the generations now because it was happened, they were part of the swinging 60s and
they were part of that time.
That time of which is really amazing. And I have the pleasure of working with people of that age group and just going, I've got good hope for all of our sex lives long term. But it is about how do we, when that time people were encouraged to start looking at their vulvas, because I think people weren't looking at their vulvas. Yeah. And that's when the hair started also getting, taken away. So it's that concept, but I still would encourage people, have a look at your vulva, talk about it with, if you've got kids, talking about what's, that it's normal. But there isn't, I don't think in all my research there's not an abnormal inner labia. Like we've got different skin there. The inner labia is similar to the skin lining of your mouth, so it heals. It heals really quickly, but it is that similar lining as such. Yeah, we need to be looking at our vulvas because we need to be seeing if there is changes. So we do know that you can have lots of different medical conditions that can impact the vulva, so like sclerosis or genital warts. So having an understanding of what's normal, sort of like a breast test. It is good to be able to see, but having that, watching or seeing your own via a mirror, but knowing that yours is normal. Like I can pretty much guarantee you it's normal.
Yes, everything's normal.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's hopefully just comforting for people to hear out there that if you're a vulva owner out there, it's normal. Yeah.
And what you just need to know is that if your normal changes, that's when you need to see the doctor.
Perfect.
So that's that concept of understanding what your own normal is. And if you have big fleshy inner labias, that's fabulous because it's going to be great. If you have small tucked away and that's the way your body was built, that's fabulous too. So I'm not sort of, saying there is no one right way of being or looking. And looking at the labia libraries, I'd really recommend. There it's a fabulous, again, Victorian-based website, but labia libraries will show diversity and that's really important.
Now, where would somebody find, for those out there who've never heard of the labia libraries, where would they go?
I think you can just Google labialibraries.com.au.
Yeah, cool.
And you have to say that you're 18 to go through, inverted commas. They basically show a lot of diversity at different angles too, because I think which is really great.
Wow. Okay. And I do send clients there and also encourage a lot of clients to look at their labia, which I think is important. So I think I really appreciate that comment that you said. And what is your normal and what changes it's just like our skin. Oh, we've got, that's.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I always talk about, the skin is a really big sexual organ. Like this is really important, but it's quite funny because I often talk about vulvas and genitals, but it's actually the brain, which is really big. And working in disability, there's many ways to have orgasms. And again, this might be another podcast, but we look at rerouting pleasure a lot of the time. Okay. So you can have an illness or disability which impacts your sensation. So maybe a spinal cord injury, but, we've looked at rerouting pleasure to behind your ear or the level of injury, another whole conversation topic. But, our brains are amazing. And it's about following following pleasure is where I'm really keen for people to experience, is follow the pleasure and it gets better.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good highlight, is that our bodies are capable of pleasure. So whether how we're all diverse, we're all unique, whatever we've experienced, our body is still capable of pleasure.
Yes. Yep.
And I think that's just something for people to keep in mind. So whether that's, trauma, or as you said, like medical histories or accidents, or right, we're still designed for pleasure. Somehow, somewhere, our body goes, hey, you deserve this.
Yeah. And it's understanding anatomy and understanding the physiological processes means you can understand how does disease or how does trauma impact on bodies, because with that knowledge you start going, oh, that's why that's happening, or you may have had non-consensual touch and it's a reflexogenic reaction to get wet and to have an engorgement of the clitoris.
Yeah, and so actually, let's pause, because I think that's pretty fascinating stuff that a lot of people actually don't know or think about.
Yep.
So what you're saying is our body can still respond to touch that's not warranted, or that we're consciously saying, okay. So talk us through that.
Yeah, look, I think it's probably my biggest aha moment when I work with clients, that there's two ways to get an erect penis or an engorged clitoris. So that's what I talk a lot about. If you look at the Clitoris model website, you will see the clitoris in its glory, but basically the bulbs get engorged with blood. The two ways are the psychogenic erections. So you might think, hear something in your environment that turns you on, and that can be consensual or non-consensual. So we call it non-concordant. And then that goes down your spinal cord, comes out at sort of a level in your spinal cord to get any erect penis or an engorged clitoris. But you also have your reflexogenic erections. So basically, if you're touched on the penis or you're touched on the vulva, it goes to your S2 to S4, I think. And so basically, you're touched on the vulva. It may be consensual or not consensual. It goes immediately to your spinal cord, and the spinal cord kicks back in and says, right, there's movement in the area. Let's go. And then the clitoris will engorge with blood, and then wrap around the urethra and the vagina. It will then cause basically lubrication, because the body is protecting itself. If you're having movement in the area, it's a normal way of protecting itself. And you also will have quite possibly have orgasms. So people can often experience what they would, what the body is interpreting as pleasure in a non-consensual sexual activity. And that's really important to know, that it's not your body's just looking after itself. It's not that you wanted this, had this. And really, even the courts haven't really understood this over the years. And it's been this concept of, well, they were wet. They really wanted this. It's not the case. You can get wet, you can have orgasms and it not be consensual. And that's really, really important to know, so that people can understand how their body is reacting, and then re-engage with pleasure post-assault can be a really, understanding how the autonomic and parasympathetic nervous system work within bodies is really important. And that then feeds into stuff like post-traumatic stress disorder. It might be from a car accident or from a sexual assault. The PTSD nervous system basically acts in a similar way as the sexual response system does. So often, you need to decouple some of these thoughts or body sensations on what does that mean in your head space. And that's where sexologists are fabulous.
That's what we do.
OTs, we really work with the education and with the practicalities. And then I am so grateful to the sexologist friends that I have that we refer over to people to go, right, let's unpack that. But understanding anatomy and physiology is really, really important and can help rebuild. We have sexual scripts often based on media or porn, and it's actually trying to reform those. And how does my body work? What happens? Interestingly, last little bit is that I think for penis owners, often there is also, even like with medical procedures, often people are seen as dirty, or, they've got an erection while they're having a catheter inserted, or someone was, I had someone talking about they were burning off genital warts off a penis owner and he got an erection. Like, that is a reflexogenic erection. But the medical professional saw that as, you're dirty and that's not great.
Really?
Yeah. So we need medical professionals to be telling clients, if you're touching anyone on any of the genitals, you need to say there is a reflexogenic erection, and this is, so you can use that as an education concept. So people don't feel shame. We often have clients come in, you start talking about sex, and there's an erection. So I was working with one client who was really shameful about his porn use, and would come into the session and then they didn't turn up again. And when we kept on following up, it was because he got an erection during the occupational therapy session. So again, using that conversations around reflexogenic erections. If we talk about sex, you might get an erection. It's not concordant to the fact that you like this therapist or this is what's going on. It's just actually that's how bodies work.
Yeah.
So really decoupling that and getting therapists and medical professionals to understand, you need to give that education to start with, or how do we, talk about that?
And that's such a brilliant takeaway. I think that's really important because, from the therapeutic perspective, I then take that, but I look at the context, right? So the context is really important. And I give that medical example a lot is, if you're having for a penis owner, for example, their penis is being touched and they're getting hard. Well, it's because their penis is being held, and that makes sense that right. But the context is you don't find that doctor sexy or, that doesn't necessarily mean that, I've had clients who then are wondering if they're gay because they've gotten an erection. And, then we're looking at sexual, orientation, and just because that they might have had a little bit of blood flow to the penis with a male doctor holding the penis. So there's a lot to, as you said, it's the decoupling, but it's also the context that's really important.
There is, if you are touched on the penis or on the vulva, the body will be a reflexogenic arch to engorge you with blood. Like, that's just how bodies work, and it has nothing to do about who you're attracted to.
Correct. And then, but putting the brain back with that, and I'll just go back to penis owners because I work a lot with ED and PE.
Yes.
Like that's a lot. And so I will have, if there's any male penis owners listening today, who would have their penis touched, maybe in a romantic way, but when all the context is right, they're wondering why their penis wouldn't be working. So it works both ways. I just want to kind of point that out. Yeah,
it really does. And I also think that neuroplasticity is amazing. And if you are getting a lot of, if you're watching or getting stimuli in, masturbation or lots of certain ways, you get this sort of sexual script, or if you're seeing lots of porn, you're seeing lots of information to be able to get an erection. And when you're with just one person and doesn't have all that information, often then that can be, it's not working, and whose fault is that? So it is certainly not saying porn is bad, but if you're consuming a lot of stuff, and then it's just different concepts, different conversations, different contexts the context is really important. And I think we often will talk about, if you're able to wake up with an erection in the morning, or with, and clitorises. So we talk about penis owners having multiple erections during the night. Clitorises do as well. So they've actually done research.
Thank you.
Clitoris owners have multiple erections, possible orgasms overnight. And again, it's just the way the body keeps the blood flow happening as such. So if we know that, and then during the day there's issues, and we're seeing that that's probably a bit more of a context issue rather than narrowing of the the arteries, or basically, if I talk to health professionals, if you have any disease or disability that impacts blood flow, so diabetes or all sorts of things, then you need to be, often the clitoris and the penis is often seen like the canary in the mind. So if you're having erectile dysfunction, it's really important to go and check it out with your doctor as well, because if you're having narrow blood vessels, and the clitoris blood vessels are even narrower than the penis blood vessels, so there might be some indications of heart disease or stroke. So it is important to still check out erectile dysfunction and clitoris, dysfunction with GPs, because it's actually the canary in the mind
That's such a good point. Actually, I really haven't thought about that. But, I'd be really kind of skeptical here is if, I'm sending vulva owners to go tell their doctors, hey, could you check me out? Because, I just want to make sure there's blood flow, which is a fairly legitimate thing for me to ask a client and a client to see. I wonder how many GPs are actually going to be able to have the knowledge to go, that's quite a valid thing to check out for a vulva owner. Yeah,
you're right. I think that we are often going to have to be going in and educating the GP. Yeah. Like we made the glow-in-the-dark clitorises for the clitmus presence, more so because we know that if you have a body with a vulva under an MRI and there's an erection, then the clitoris will glow white because of the blood flow. So the MRI will pick up the blood flow. And so that's how we're starting to get the knowledges of what's happening with clitorises in bodies that are alive, not just the cadavers. So, that's where the brainwave of let's have a glow-in-the-dark clitoris as a which I think I probably will have more fun with than the actual whole model of the clitoret model. But it's anatomically, that's why we created the glow-in-the-dark ones, because it was increased blood flow is what you see. So it is really important. The research was only just last year about measuring the we also know there's only just last year was the nerves. So we know that there's I think 10,280 or something clitoret nerves. Wow. Nerves to the clitoris, but there's only about 4,000 to the penis. And that was amazing research by trans men donated one of their dorsal nerves during an operation. Wow. And then the researchers were able to count the nerve endings of the dorsal nerve. So there's two dorsal nerves that supply the clitoris, and they're huge. They're really large nerves. You can see them with the naked eye, but the arteries to the clitoris are quite narrow. So it is. Yeah, anatomy and physiology is amazing, and why we don't know all of this is absolutely astounding.
So,
sorry, I've just really jumped all over the place there. I'm really sorry.
I love it. No. I guess when I tell my clients, and I just want to make sure I'm saying the right thing, but I say that the clitoris is designed purely for pleasure. Yeah.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure I'm.
Yep, it is correct. Yeah, okay. There is no other reason that it's there. It is for pleasure, and it is the understanding. So, Jasmine Avocado, Dr. Jasmine Avocado, is part of the International Cliterati, and they do a lot of cutting or female genital mutilation work. So again, if the glands are cut up, the bulbs are still there. So really thinking about pleasure and how that works and how do you access that, and how does the body work for pleasure and libidos and desire, and there's so many things that we could talk about, but it is get yourself some, having understandings of anatomy and physiology just helps that conversations and helps conversations. Like I have 3 teenage daughters, conversations around, there's a lot of glow-in-the-dark clitorises around our bedrooms, and it's just like the poor friends that come in. But it is that that concept of we're all normal, but we're just made in different ways, and the clitoris is made for pleasure. It's really how lucky are we? And I know clitoris owners can have multiple orgasms. Again, how lucky are we? Exactly. Not all do, and that's okay. And it's also completely okay if none of this is for you. It's not it's not damage. No. Yeah, just because if you don't have desire and it's not a problem, that's fine. Absolutely fine.
100%. What I'm actually envisioning now is just more of the educational and the anatomy part. Yep. So, and bringing it back to sex therapy, obviously. Yeah. But all right. So I'm imagining there's a vulva in front of you, right? Yep. And so the person who's pleasing the vulva, most of the pleasure is invisible. Is what I'm really kind of getting at is the person who's looking at that vulva has no idea if these if the nerves are tingling, if things are getting engorged. Some clitoris, from my knowledge, can get hard, and you can notice a different change. Sometimes they don't. Every clitoris is a different size and position anyway. But so the person who's about to please or is pleasing, they don't
The only way you know whether someone is having a good time is to ask and to get that feedback, because there is no way of looking at a vulva and going, oh, wow, you're wet, you're really into this. Okay. It might be they've got really tight undies on, and those tight undies, or or they've just come off the bus where it's been hot and sweaty, and the clothing has not been great. So the only way to know if someone is into what you're doing is to ask and to get the feedback verbally. Only way.
Thank you, because that is what I go on and on about. And I think a lot of people, it's really hard for the person who's about to touch that vulva to kind of want to do the check-in. It's like, especially for people who've known each other for a really long time. Yeah. Like, well, I've known you for a long time, and we've been together for and it's weird to then have that check-in. I'm like, but it makes things so much sexier.
It makes things so much sexier, and it is that we learn and discover things about our bodies that we never did, 20 or 10 years ago. And also our sensations change and our input changes. So we need to keep on the check-ins because it will make it more fun. If it's more fun, we're going to be wanting to do this more often.
Exactly.
But it also, there's as you know, as a sexologist, it's not just about anatomy. It's what's between your ears and how do we work with all of that? But it is, it's good to know what a clitoris looks like underneath the skin. I think that is really useful, because I think that often this concept of this small round nub, which is in the Oxford Dictionary still the definition. Like if you look up the Oxford definition, it's a small round nub at the top of the, oh my gosh. What? Yeah, we've got a long way to go really with clitoris education, but actually look up, like our website has images of a clitoris and how we basically have a pull apart model that allows you to go, right, the bulbs are behind this bit of the inner labia, or they wrap around the urethra and peeing after sex is good. And what does that look like with thrush and all sorts of things. But it is really important to understand, where does the clitoris sit underneath the skin, and as we said before, they all sit differently but all around about in the same place. But that's why a different position for someone will be really stimulating compared to someone else. It's not.
Exactly. And I think that's a really good point. Is that just pleasure for one person? Then you have another partner, and it's not necessarily the same thing. Yeah. And I think people who have pleased different vulva owners think that there is a one-size-fits-all approach, or then kind of go into I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. And it's all because they haven't been checking in, or they haven't been asking questions or seeking feedback, which and
it's often, I think, that a lot of the folk that I work with is that they need to take control to say, yes, you can, if someone does check in with me, I can say something. It's like, no, I don't want to. It is that real going back and forth as such, and understanding your own body yourself is really important, to actually know what do you like and what don't you like in amongst, it's busy lives and what happens is going on, and understanding muscles and how they fit around the vulva and, all sorts of concepts. There's a lot to learn when we still don't know a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like we're almost, we're all trying to be masters of ourselves and trying to figure it out, because there's no teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, it's really interesting actually, because I've worked for 25 years in Melbourne and into a lot of diverse cultural communities. And I actually find that some of the non-English speaking language backgrounds have a much better sex ed understanding because they talk.
Really?
Yeah. So I often will try and challenge therapists or medical professionals to not make assumptions about what different, just because someone's got a different culture or, what their understanding. We don't know what their understanding of sex or sex ed is, but it's, I've had more in-depth conversations and people having understandings about sex ed with an interpreter present than not. It's often we will just use interpreters, might be a phone interpreter from New South Wales, because often communities can be small. That you don't want, you don't really want the person that you're going to be seeing on the weekend who's your interpreter to know all about your sex life. But, I've done lots of work with folks with disabilities that just gets, menopause gets missed because they're not speaking. But there's lots of different concepts around understanding it, and just making no assumptions is my big concept for health professionals. Don't make assumptions about someone, what people are into and who they love or want to love. It's just keeping it really keeping an open-minded concept, because we naturally as humans try and box things. That's how our brains were designed. So it's trying to, particularly as therapists, is trying to uncouple some of that concepts and going, well, what's our own biases? As with even with individual partners, it's like, what's a bias? This really worked for someone else, but you just need to check in. Yeah,
and having these conversations before and after as well, which I do a lot of encouraging, is how do you actually talk about stuff and it not be awkward or weird, and if you don't, the consequences of not having these conversations. Which I think is pretty important. Yeah, really, really important, and makes for some amazing, makes for amazing pleasure. Follow pleasure, follow pleasure, follow pleasure. Sounds like that's kind of the key takeaway. I was going to ask you if you had a key takeaway, but I think besides follow pleasure,
key takeaway. I think, my key takeaway. God, there's so many. I think my key takeaway is that bodies can be non-concordant. So bodies can respond in ways that you do not want, and that just know that your body's trying to protect you. Yeah. So that's a key takeaway. And the other one is try and understand anatomy, talk about sex, but have some concepts of the more education around bodies, the safer people are. So particularly people with disabilities, we often are not giving them the same rights. We don't have the best sex ed all the time. But if someone is disabled from a younger age, we need to teach body autonomy because their bodies are often touched a lot. But actually really that concept of the more knowledge you have, the safer you are. If you've got small children, the more knowledge using correct anatomical terms makes them safer. I've worked with people where a kid has come to kinder and said, my uncle's touched my joystick, and it got missed because the joystick was, euphemism for penis. So using body correct terminology is really important, and have a look at what the clitoris looks like, and understanding the difference between non-engorged and engorged clitoris is a really, we're having that. I had friends who were, when they were small kids, were drawing dick and balls everywhere. I was like, right, great. But can you draw a clitoris? Yes. So, I think we need to, clitoris bomb the toilet, back of the toilet doors.
Oh, I think I'm going to teach my kids how to draw clitoris after this episode.
Yeah.
I have a 3-year-old who already knows the word vulva and clitoris, and they go to daycare and use those terms. And it's funny, as you're saying, they need to know. But I get the response of is people kind of go, oh, we don't want to hear the language. And I'm the pushy mom. And, when I take off my sexology hat, I'm the pushy mom trying to educate the masses.
It makes them safer.
People are uncomfortable hearing a 3-year-old say the word vulva and clitoris, and I'm like, that's my kid.
That's my kid. Oh, that is proud mum moment.
Yeah, it's a proud mum moment.
Definitely a proud mum moment. Yeah. No, it is that knowledge is power, and the more education, and look, we've still got a long way to go. We, would love to get the clitoris models into schools.
I think I know how just out of curiosity, how far along is that? Never mind.
Yeah. Look, we certainly, it really depends on the individual health ed teacher. And so if there's any teachers that listening out there, if you've got a penis model in your school, you should have a clitoris model.
Thank you.
So, if you're teaching, anatomy, it's just anatomy and it's just physiology. So having, we design the clitoris models for people with disabilities and really with educators in mind. And I would love to be able to get the clitoris model into schools so that we can, by the time that those school leavers become doctors, they already know what the clitoris looks like. We know that health professionals, I will give them all plasticine for any educations, which we do live education, and I'll get them to make a model of an engorged clitoris. And I'm happy to admit over the last 10 years, they used to start with just lots of round balls, and that has progressed to more anatomically correct, but the majority still don't get it. So if we can teach teenagers what a clitoris looks like, then that will translate to medical professionals and health professionals. And it should be not ick. It should be
it's
part of
our
it.
body. Like what? Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm going to.
Yeah, we could go down a rabbit hole.
Right, I'm going to stop. Oh, Anita, this has been fabulous. I really appreciate having you today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Amazing. And thank you, everybody. Hopefully you've learned something about the clitoris, the vulva, and oh my God, some fabulous takeaways. So thanks again.
Pleasure.